A report from Group 17 by Robert C. O'Brien, Chapter 19. The knocker on her front door sounded again, and they were back in only half the hour Mr. O'Neill had asked for. She did not know what that meant beyond the fact that there was still time to get Willis to school, and that what she should do, and that was what she should do. It would be better for him than staying home again on this wet day. Mr. O'Neill's car was at his cabin. It was still raining, so they took hers down the muddy driveway, left on the narrow lane out to the highway. They were silent during the ride to school, which lasted 15 minutes. After she had turned the car around and headed back through the rain, she asked, though she did not want to, what he had learned from Willis. She saw that he had been thinking about how to answer the question, and had made up his mind. "I learned," he said, "that Willis has been fooling us all." She kept driving, but slowly, her eyes on the wet windshield. "Fooling us. He and his sister Allie had a game they kept a secret. It was a dangerous game. It involved, eventually, her going inside the wall of Villa Petrograd." "Did she go inside?" "Yes." "How often?" "At least once. According to Willis, only once." "I don't know what that means." Her voice sounded tired. "So far, it's just a fact we didn't know before." "What made you suspect it in the first place?" "Some things," Willis said. He told her what Willis had said casually at first about the animal tree, about chimpanzees, and then later, this rainy morning, about the two men, the keepers, and about the gate. "It was clever of you, but I don't know where it leads, unless you're saying that Allie is inside Villa Petrograd now, and if that's what you're saying, I don't believe it." "No, I'm not saying that. Not quite so definitively. Not quite so definitely. But I think it's a possibility that didn't get considered before, and one fact can't be ignored. The night she disappeared was, as far as Willis knows, the only time she ever went in there, the only time they ever found the gate open." She slowed the car still farther. She no longer trusted her driving, yet she did not want to stop and look at him. She trusted her face She trusted her face still less. "Mr. O'Neill, I'm trying to think, but I can't. I'm too confused. I'm in the middle of some kind of senseless nightmare, and now you've joined it too. This morning when you came, I was glad. I felt relieved. I thought maybe I could ask you—" She stopped talking and stared hard at the road. "Ask me what?" "For help. To stay calm. To let me know what to think. At first, they said Allie was drowned, and I knew it was true. I found the bicycle myself, remember? That was awful, but it was done. It was over, except that John never believed it. I didn't blame him. But then, suddenly, it wasn't just John. Next came Henry." "Henry? He helps with the gardening. John talked him into believing that Allie wasn't drowned. That didn't surprise me. Henry's not very bright. But then that policeman, Officer Simon, came around. He is bright, or seems to be. He did this on his own. He didn't talk much, but he asked a few questions. What I gathered was that he, too, couldn't quite believe the drowning theory. Also, that it annoyed him. Right at the spot where Allie disappeared was a big tract of land where they couldn't look for her at all, and it was the most sensible place to look. I believe they made a formal request and were refused. I think what he planned to do was look anyway, unofficially. Some of the neighborhood boys, when they were younger, made a game out of climbing that wall. Officer Simon was one of the boys. Henry was another. Officer Simon came and left and came again. The second time, he wanted me to recheck exactly what Allie was wearing when she disappeared. Of course, she comes home from school in the afternoon and changes while I'm still at work. Still, I did recheck. I spent 2 hours in her empty room going through her things. Not that there are so many, but it was a hard thing to do. From what's missing, I know. Blue flannel shirt, blue jeans, white sneakers, the usual undergarments. The blue shirt, did it have buttons? Yes, of course. What color buttons? Blue, I suppose, though they might have been white. I like Officer Simon. He's been gentle and considerate from the beginning, and still is. I suppose that's his trouble. He got to thinking, suppose we're wrong, and he couldn't sleep nights. Now he's turned private detective. And you wish he wouldn't. It's worse than that, don't you see? She stopped the car, finally pulling off the wet black country road and leaning her forehead on the steering wheel. There's a question none of them asks. Suppose Allie did wander into the Russians' property. She shouldn't have done it, I know. Still, it's not such a terrible crime, especially if they left the gate open. But if she did, Why didn't she walk out again? Or suppose she decided to explore and they shut the gate not knowing she was there. Wouldn't they let her out if she asked? Why hasn't she come home? If you think that's all you get, the same question, why? There isn't an answer. I don't believe those people are fiends. If a 12-year-old girl came trespassing on their land, would they lock her up, shoot her? The idea is ridiculous. And would they then take her bicycle down to the river? You know they wouldn't. They'd simply turn her out and tell her to stay out. At worst, they might call the police or even the State Department and make a formal complaint about trespassing, but they wouldn't keep her. It's not a military camp. It's a vacation place, a resort. Or so they've always told us. Having told what she had to tell, she looked at him, finally not knowing what to expect. His expression was gentle. He said, I wish I could say something to make you feel better. I hope I can eventually, but all I can say now is that I think there is a chance that Allison really is in the Villa Petrograd. The odds are small enough that I can't encourage you to feel hopeful, and yet, you see, I couldn't just ignore it. I had to talk with Willis, and to do that I had to upset you, and now what? Now I don't know. There are some other people I have to talk to, and to do that I need a telephone. She started the car. Mr. O'Neill, if you knew, if you suspected this about Allie, why couldn't you have told me before? Why did you wait? Why? Because the idea didn't occur to me until 5:30 this morning. I haven't thought about anything else since. Having learned what he needed to know, having trodden on eggs, Fergus went back to his canoe, back to his cabin. On the way, he thought hard and felt his cheerfulness rising again, now that he was no longer obliged to conceal it from Mrs. Adam. As he paddled hard upstream past the wall, past Dr. Schuttz's laboratory, he resolved to act on his own two convictions, as if they were proven facts. One, that Dr. Schutz and his assistants, what share had he in the plan, had physical possession of Allison Adam. Two, that he, Fergus, had surmised correctly the reason for this possession, and that the Russian owners of Villa Petrograd knew nothing about it. He had a daydream fixed in his mind. He had the girl, Allison, by the hand and was walking with her to the door of the White House to present her to her mother, perhaps to watch her smile. The dream was marred by two flaws. The first small. He had never seen Allison, so the girl at his side was faceless. The second was more fearful, a factor still unknown. He had studied Dr. Schutz's experiments with the Steinkampf syndrome. The girl had been in his hands for a week. Thus, the smile remained uncertain. He maneuvered the canoe through the boathouse door, scraping neither side, locked the river door behind him, replaced his coil of rope, his chain and padlock, and racked his paddle in its place on the wall. Having locked the landside door as well, he set out at a trot for the cabin. It was uphill all the way, and he was pleased to note that he was not entirely winded when he reached the porch. It was not lunchtime, but almost, so he carried a handful of graham crackers to the State Department car. Noting as he extracted them from the box that it was empty. He had nearly run through Mr. Wilcox's cabin supplies and would have to find a grocery store to replenish them. But first he had to find a telephone, and wished, not for the first time, that the cabin had one. The lack was deliberate. It added a sense of rustic isolation, a pleasant feeling in ordinary circumstances, but distressing now that his sense of urgency had grown overwhelming. He had to contact Mr. Bales and Colonel Attenborough. On an impulse, he wanted first to talk to Officer Simon. Before he left Mrs. Adam, he had learned from her two things about him: his home telephone number and the fact that he had remarkably pale gray eyes in a dark-tanned face. He was reasonably sure that Officer Simon owned a length of manila rope. For a telephone, again on the impulse that he could not explain, he did not go to Mr. Wilcox's house. At the corner where the small road met the highway, there was a gas station. This morning, riding with Mrs. Adam, he had noticed near it a glass-walled telephone booth. He had a pocket full of change. The rain continued. The water ran in small streams of dust and grease down the sides of the booth as Ferguson dialed. He wondered why the telephone company made them of glass, breakable, hideously hot in summer, cold in winter, and ugly with dirt in all seasons. Officer Simon did not answer the telephone himself, but was summoned by the female voice that did. He sounded hurried, but slowed down immediately when he heard the subject matter to be discussed. "Did you know the girl?" "No, not personally." Then what's your interest? A flagging of Officer Simon's own interest. I know her family slightly. Also, I'm living nearby. You may remember the log cabin just up the river. You mean the Wilcox place? Yes. Your name's O'Neill, that's right. From Boston. We talked to you. We checked Boston. Everything cleared okay. Officer Simon, I've been talking with Mrs. Adam, also with her son Willis. She says you're still looking for the girl. The case is still open, if that's what you mean. Officer Simon was cautious. Not exactly. Mrs. Adams said you don't believe she drowned. In an open case, Dr. O'Neill, we don't believe anything except that the girl is gone, and we don't know where. So, sure, we keep looking. If you're looking in the Villa Petrograd, the Russian place, I have some information you ought to hear. There was a pause. When Officer Simon spoke again, he was more cautious than ever. The Russian place, that's diplomatic territory, outside our jurisdiction. But the girl was in there. You know that? I know it. Can you prove it? I can't prove it, but when you hear it, you'll believe it. When can I talk to you? There was another pause. When Officer Simon spoke, his voice had become urgent again. Look, I'm on duty now. I'm already late. I can get off in 6, maybe 5 hours. But isn't this duty? Well, you don't understand. The lieutenant took me off the case. But why, if it's still open? Because he thinks the girl drowned. We got into, look, I'll see you at your cabin about 5 o'clock on my own time, okay? 5 o'clock, I'll be there. 5 o'clock, that would be roughly 6 hours from now. Time enough to break the news to Mr. Bales and Colonel Attenborough. It occurred to him what an extremely odd piece of news it would seem to them, with a personal aspect that they would be unlikely at first to comprehend. He had seen no reason to mention to them at all any of the events connected with the Adam family. The boy on the bicycle, the 2 policemen, the missing girl, when he had last talked to Bales and Attenborough, those had all seemed unrelated to the project at hand. Now the two had sprung together like the jaws of a trap, and caught in the jaws, along with the girl, Allison Adam, was the biologist Fergus O'Neill. He had lost his non-involvement. He now hated Dr. Schutz. In the rain-spattered telephone booth, as he dialed Mr. Bales's number, he had a disturbing thought. The surprising thing was not that the two groups of events had come together, but that they had taken him so long to put together. He had the feeling that if he had mentioned the girl's disappearance, Mr. Bales, trained in the science of perpetual suspicion, would have spotted the connection instantly. On the other end of the line, Mr. Bales was cheerful. We finally found your missing paper. AMB, what is it? The one in the footnote, you remember? Of course I remember. Do you have it? There's a copy on my desk. It costs 60 German marks, about $15, to have it Xeroxed. Another 60 to have it translated to English. You know why we couldn't find it? Because it wasn't classified. That's the trouble with working too long in this place. Where was it? Berlin, Archives of Medicine, hence the AMB. Open to the public. Somebody here thought he recognized the style of classification from having done some research there just after the war. It's a pretty old paper, by the way. I thought it would be. It's interesting. It's signed by our friend the doctor, and it ties in an odd sort of way with your Steinkopf theory. Look, said Fergus, not trying to keep the urgency out of his voice. Could we have another meeting? Could you get hold of Attenborough? He's with me now. We were going to suggest the same thing. A couple of new things have come up. I'll bring the paper along. Good, said Fergus. But before you come, there's another line of investigation you might get started. It took him roughly 5 minutes to explain to Mr. Bales the kind of information he needed. After listening carefully, Mr. Bales' voice sounded more cheerful than before. It's our bread and butter, he said. We'll see you in half an hour. And that is the end of chapter 19.